Well, hello there. How you doing? You know, the one book I left out of the 10-book recommendation list, actually it was 11, is this book. And I think everybody should actually own it. He supposedly gave this to Tesla, and Tesla gave extremely high approval of this book. Not that that's important necessarily, but the book is about 85% accurate. And when it doesn't get accurate, it kind of dances around. And that's extremely high praise. People are like, well, you know, 15% of it's wrong. He never defines the term field. He actually uses a different type of nomenclature because nothing is known except the modality of the knower. And he refers to centripetal field action as north-south. And he refers to centrifugal field action, which would be the magnetic field, as east-west. And, you know, as long as you could decipher a few things like that, I can't recommend, and I have the link for this book below. This is the hardcover edition, which I think is $35. So I have the link below if you want to order it. And I actually can't give high enough praise to this book. I really cannot. It's just, I'm the one, by the way, you're welcome, that digitized Walter Russell's books. They're kind of out there because of me. There's a lot of diagrams in this, and when I and you and everybody else went to school, we learned the Mendeleev chart of elements, but his table of elements shows that all elements operate off of harmonics. This isn't it, but one of countless diagrams. So I can't recommend this book enough. The Universal One is really top 5 must own books, and as a early morning or late evening book, you don't actually have to start or stop at a specific spot. You can just close your eyes and pick any section and just start reading, and you're not going to miss out on anything. Here's a beautiful diagram. Really, really great stuff. Can't recommend it high enough. I actually like to get into talking about the impossibles, but one thing that I like to talk about first are these little Baofeng radios. They're currently $62. In live stream, everybody asks about them because they're always hanging behind me. I've got 3 of them, and they're quite amazing. I have the larger battery on this. There's some qualities that this battery has, and you can look it up online, that I actually can't talk about. In other words, it will do things that I can't talk about. And this is way more than a 2-meter 440, which you do have to have a ham license for to transmit on. You don't have to have a license to listen, of course. That's at 144 to 148 megahertz, and in the 440 range, 440 to 448. What's amazing about this is that it's super cheap, price-wise, but people will spend, it has 8 watts output. It has 1 watt, 4 watt, and 8 watt output. People will spend a lot of money for the little family handheld walkie-talkie units, 99% of which maximum output is 4 watts. Most of them less than 4 watts. This will transceive, but you don't have to have a license for that. This will transceive on that at double the most expensive professional walkie-talkie. You know, you go on Amazon and you just type in walkie-talkie, right? 99% of them are 4 watts or less. This one will transmit at 8. You also, too, have the emergency channel. You also, too, can listen to AM, FM.
For portions of southern.
That's NOAA weather radio. Let me transition over to... this is FM radio, which they're currently...
There are lots of podcasts about entrepreneurship.
For being remote somewhere, just listening to regular broadcasts, and of course I got a couple of them right here. Comes with the charger and, you know, other little nonsense that I don't have out here. But they really are quite amazing, and everybody keeps asking me about them. And I think really everybody should own them. They're currently $62. This is the 8P. There's a few different ones that look almost identical, but I have the link for it below. But listening to radio, ultra high power, 8 watts on walkie-talkie frequencies. you can just download the frequency list of where you can and can't transmit and know the walkie-talkie frequencies, and there's an emergency frequency in the walkie-talkie frequency spectrum. And it will do some other things that it's not supposed to do that I can't talk about, but you can Google the answers to that. So I have the link for these below. People have been asking me about these for years, these little Baofeng radios, so everybody should own one. You know, if it's a family, whatever, you know, obviously having 2 or 3 and transmit and receive for quite a long distance. I'd like to get into an interesting thing about the impossibles. And a lot of I was watching a video by, there's a gray-haired guy that is a brilliant scientist, and he was making a bunch of comments about highly educated people, and I've hung around them, countless ones of them, PhDs. It's kind of amazing, it's antithetical to what a superficial intelligence would think. It's like, well, a more educated person is a deeper thinker, he's more intelligent, can give more intelligent responses, but the deeper you get into doctorate, postdoctorate, the more you actually get indoctrinated, and the less you are an actual thinker and an inventor. What you're doing is regurgitating and repeating the stuff you're told to believe in. This is kind of like clergy. Clergy of any particular denomination, whether it be Catholic or otherwise, they might be able to speak Latin and possibly even Greek, but all they're doing is regurgitating the stuff that they were taught to believe in. They've never had a thought of their own. Most of them don't. And the same is true of this type of education. Today's scientists are not actually scientists. What they are is mathematicians. I'd like to go over a list of impossibles, things that don't actually exist, and yet all of Academia Nauk in Russian would be Academy of Sciences. These are not scientists, they're mathematicians. I've got every book essentially ever written on magnetism, and of course lodestones have been known about for God knows 10, 20,000 years. You know, they fascinated people, you know, they jumped together, and you know, they were considered to be spiritual objects. Some of them thought they had a soul because they would move on their own without you pushing. They're very, very fascinating. And the assumption that even everybody today, because Tesla never said there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. Walter Russell even never says that. There's nobody. Maxwell, Clerk, Steinmetz, Oliver Heaviside, Faraday, none of these people ever said there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. The only person that's ever said that is myself, and I've discussed it endlessly, and I've proven it, and you know, the magnetic field by definition, of course, is centrifugal and repulsive, and of course the magnetic field is a dielectric field. That would be analogous to saying that ice is the field of water when it's cold. And it's like, well, of course ice is water, but we got this unique word called ice, you know, referring to cold water. It's a very crude analogy. But there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. But what the people that make correct observations but incorrect conclusions on is they'll actually draw a line of factual reasoning based upon observation and deduction. You say, well, these are magnets. I got a bunch of magnets behind me here, but I don't want to grab them. It's like, well, yeah, this is true. And of course, well, these have a magnetic field around them. It's like, well, that's true. Add back to the physical object itself, because what it's actually setting up is a coherency of the ether itself. And that's why we have this palpable field, whether you put steel around a magnet or another magnet around it, when we're talking about magnetic repulsion, which of course is real, and it is magnetism because it is centrifugal and it is repulsive. Now Walter Russell refers to that as radiation, and he refers to attraction as gravitation, and that's the closest he gets to the accuracy. And he is accurate, but he should have taken another step and said that there's no such thing as magnetic attraction, which is accurate. And I'd like to go to some other impossibles. First, I'd like to actually define so-called magnet. I think I have it here on attraction and repulsion. Yes, one is an effect of contraction, the other of expansion. One is an effect of gravitation, the other radiation. Radiation, in his crude analogy, would be magnetic repulsion and the magnetic field, which is radiation. Radiation, of course, is centrifugal, is outward motion, but the correct observations and the deduction actually made by humans since the dawn of time by using lodestones and then of course magnets says, well, these are magnets. That's correct. These have a magnetic field around them, and that's also too correct. Well, they're accelerating towards one another, and since they're magnets, there's a magnetic field around them. And this is magnetic attraction, and this is where everything absolutely falls apart. And also, too, the correct observation with incorrect conclusion, and the same is true of gravity, and that's what a magnet is a point source field object. Just as a 5-watt, this isn't a 5-watt one, but the same distinction between a 5-watt light bulb being useless and unimpressive, but I have a 5-watt laser, by the way. It is not only impressive, it's dangerous, it will permanently blind you, it's just flat out dangerous. And so what's the difference? 5 watts is 5 watts, right? I've asked this to people endlessly. It's like, well, what's the distinction? Well, I don't know. Well, they're both 5 watts, but the distinction is an attribution because we have everything operating in unison. It's easy to break a twig, of course, but you take 100 twigs and you wrap them together where they're all operating in unison, then it's basically impossible to break them. This, of course, is a Roman symbology since ancient days, but the same is true of the magnetic field. You know, before a magnet becomes a magnet, it is quantitatively 100% identical before it becomes a magnet and once it becomes. If it's quantitatively identical, then what's the distinction? Well, the distinction is now it's operating as a point source object. It's a point source field. This thing that people are calling magnetic attraction, which doesn't exist, is no different than saying point source gravity. All you have to do is take the inverse of that and apply the right-hand rule, and you actually understand what so-called anti-gravity is, but that's a matter for another discussion. So, also, too, the correct observation with the incorrect conclusion is that since these magnets are accelerating towards one another, leaving out, this is magnetic attraction, which is false, they're actually not accelerating towards one another, and neither are two objects or more than two objects accelerating towards each other. You can actually see this underneath the supercell. There's actually a null point created between both that they're actually accelerating towards. And this, of course, is one of countless thousands of proofs of the ether. The ether, of course, is not objectively knowable. Neither can you point to someone's feelings, like, oh, there's happiness. Or, who is happy, who is sad. We can actually point to that, of course. But it is not an objective thing. Well, I'm going to show you what happiness is without the attribute of the person that's happy or sad or whatever, and that's, of course, completely impossible. But anyway, magnetic attraction does not exist. This is one of the impossibles, and I'm proud to be the first person on Earth and understood magnetism far deeper than Nikola Tesla, Faraday, or Steinmetz. And if you counter that, and some people have in the past, like, well, go show me anywhere in Tesla's writings, or Faraday, or Steinmetz, or Heaviside, or James Clerk Maxwell, or J.J. Thomson, or Walter Russell, where they talk about or explain so-called magnetic attraction, which doesn't exist, and they don't. Not even in their own words. I mean, they could have said it in a different fashion, but they do not. This is coherent dielectric acceleration. This is no different than saying point source gravity. If we're able to take two heavenly bodies, that are accelerating towards not one another, but towards the lowest pressure point between both, just like there's a funnel, and there's not curved space-time going on, because space, of course, doesn't exist. It's no different than a shadow, and time is only a measure, and of course a measure is not a thing. And of course this is how they reified the term quantum, because these people, I don't care what they believe in, but they've negated the ether, and they've tried to hold up two things that don't exist. Three things, technically: space and time and quantum. And these things do not exist at all in any way, shape, or form. This is an impossible, like a unicorn or a leprechaun. I can say unicorn, you immediately have an idea in your mind of what a unicorn is, even though they don't exist. Well, these scientists are not actual scientists, or mathematicians have been propping up, vis-a-vis relativity and quantum, things that do not exist. By the way, fields don't travel. Okay? The field never travels. It is a medium disturbance. Sound is not an emission. Sound is not traveling at all. The assumed speed of sound, the assumed speed of light, is the rate of induction, or the hysteresis of the medium, meaning the maximum rate of propagation at which the medium can be disturbed. That's not my opinion. That's a hardcore fact. Also, too, it's hyper-rational, hyperlogical, and explains all observed phenomena in the universe. But these impossibles that are intellectually deflated, flat-brained, flat-brained scientists keep telling people to believe in don't actually exist. Things such as waves. There's no such thing as a wave, but they love to talk endlessly about quantum waves, waves of quantum. A wave is not a thing, rather what something does. You could say, we got flames over here waving. It's like, well, the wave is an attribute of something else. A wave is not what something is, rather what something does. Space is really, really easy. It's a negative image of pure potential. The expanding toroidal field of the magnetic field creates space. But space is not a thing at all. It's a shadow. We all have an idea exactly what a shadow is. Even a child does. But a shadow is not a thing. Neither is darkness. Of course, that's just a distinction without a difference. It's an absence of something else. But human beings, intellectual, flat-brained nature that most human beings are, unfortunately, we reify things that don't exist at all. The universe is really simple. The hairy armpit chick and muddy feet, Mother Nature, she doesn't use numbers, she doesn't have a calculator, and everything works off of centrifugal divergence and centripetal convergence, but this is only a slightly complicated way of saying simplex pressure mediation. So waves are not things, and they therefore do not exist. We could talk about something waving, of course, but a wave is not a thing. Space is no different than a shadow. Specifically, it's a shadow of pure potential. It is pure impotency, exactly like a shadow is an impotency of light and illumination. Time, of course, is only a measure. Oh, look, it's working. Time doesn't exist at all. A measure is not a thing. Shadows, we just got done talking about shadows. Same thing is true of emptiness. You know, people that actually get into pseudo-metaphysics and white lighter movements will talk about experiencing emptiness. You experienced emptiness, right? Yes, I did. You were in it, right? Yes, I was. Well, you were in it, therefore it wasn't empty, but something has to have an attribute or a qualifier whereby which, this is that. You know, you have your eyes closed and you can grab a block of ice and you know it's cold and hard. It's like, well, this is ice. It has attributes whereby which you identify it. Emptiness, by definition, would never have a qualifier or an attribute, so you can never, even if it did exist, which it does not exist, whatsoever in any way, shape, or form, it is an arbitrary concept like a unicorn. You would actually have to have qualifiers of it, on it, and about it to identify. So this is something else that doesn't exist. Same thing is true of chaos. A lot of scientists love to talk about chaos. Systems of chaos. I've been through countless books on chaos. It's all nonsense. There's near infinite complexity, but there is no such thing as chaos in nature. Mother Nature doesn't play dice. That's a quote from somebody else that I never agree with, but like a blind squirrel, you know, they'll find an acorn now and then. I'll have to get on to quantum here in a second, but also, too, Walter Russell brilliantly said there's no such thing as a negative charge. He's the only person I know that said that. There's no such thing as a negative charge. It's completely impossible. It's a ground, or it's a node terminal for a grounding of an electrical system or a system, but negative charge doesn't exist. That's like saying a shadow or emptiness is negative light. Oh, you got negative light over here. Oh, you mean shadow, right? This is where light doesn't exist, and it's not a thing at all. Yeah, it's completely crazy. I'm going to put up a black curtain outside in the sun. You know, this is the negative light. You know, because you stand behind the black curtain, you know, there's no light, it's dark. This is the negative light. There's such a thing as negative light, any more than there's such a thing as negative charge. Force, they love to reify the term force. You know, force of what, by what, and upon what. I've spoken endlessly about electrons. Same is true of photons. Tesla said there's no such thing as an electron. Dollard said that. Walter Russell said that. The same is true of virtual photons. By the way, relativity in quantum actually tries to reify this non-entity. Virtual photons, not the input or output of any experiment. They've never been observed or calculated. It's a completely arbitrary concept that has no basis in reality whatsoever. It doesn't exist. I don't know if you know the origins of the bunk term quantum. I have a link below in the description for a page where you could read this. It's Daniel Comstock, 1917. He wanted to talk about quote-unquote light atoms, or the modern doctorate of light quanta, of which Leonard Trollin, who is the author of the section, clearly was in sympathy. This is Comstock and Trollin, 1917, page 182. Gilbert Lewis, 1926, coined the term photon for the smallest unit of radiant energy, i.e. light. And this is where we get das Lichtquant, or a light quantum, in other words, the smallest unit of energy measurement. So the very person who popularized the term quantum, Leonard Trolin, was, this is a fact, a researcher into psychical research and carried out experiments in telepathy. So the guy that the guy that came up with the term quantum was a researcher into telepathy. Nature magazine, 29 October 1926. Instead of light quantum, one should consider a new type of atom, which he called a photon. So this idea of quantum and a photon are intermixed, but this idea of measure. Modern scientists are not actual scientists, they're mathematicians, and the core religion, of course, of mathematicians is the desire to count things. They're bean counters. 1, 2, they don't believe in anything you actually can't count, and quantify. Quantify, quantum, yeah, a measure. Well, quantum only means an energy quantity thereof. Quantum, of course, comes from the Latin meaning an amount, or how much. And once again, this is the religion of the bean counters, which is what these mathematicians are. They're not scientists in Aristotelian or Platonic sense. Max Planck postulated the electromagnetic energy is absorbed or emitted in discrete packets, or quantum. Quantum, of course, means a unit of energy measurement. And, of course, a measure is not a thing. A mile is not a thing. A gram is not a thing. Not an inch, a pound, a second, a meter, a volt, an amp. These are measures. Measures were invented by men. Few women. Oh, we wanted to measure things. There's a joke in there for the ladies. You know, the man always wanting to measure something. Of course, a measure of any kind is never a thing in nature. A measure cannot be a thing. A measure, of course, is a standard, agreed upon measure of something in nature. A quantum, this is a quote, is the smallest discrete unit of phenomena. For example, a quantum of light is called a photon. And a quantum of electricity is called an electron. There's no such thing as a photon particle. There ain't no such thing as an electron particle. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. And also, too, Tesla said that. The so-called discoverer of the principle of the electron, J.J. Thomson, accurately defined what it is, which is 1 unit of dielectric induction. That's J.J. Thomson. This is a quote from Walter Russell. Nothing is a more fantastical travesty of how nature works than is quantum theory. This very basis has no relationship to reality. What? Checkmate. These are the impossibles. These are the things that don't exist. I mean, you can go to any bookstore and go to the science section, and this is the garbage. It will talk about waves of quantum and quantum space, time, and quantum emptiness, photon chaos, and it's just, all you have to do is just take any book and stick in the word quantum every 6th or 5th word, and that's what all these books sound like. And, you know, this is what Tesla meant by those people that could think deeply but not clearly. Nut wards are and full of people that are very, very deep thinkers that can actually do real-time intricate chess playing in their own head, but they can't think clearly. You can think deeply and be quite nuts. You have to be able to think clearly, and this, of course, is a quote from Tesla. Anyway, I'm proud of the fact that I've defined, and not just this video, but countless others, so there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. You make correct observational deductions that are true. You know, these are magnets, magnetic field around it. They're accelerating towards one another. Well, those are correct observations, but your conclusions are incorrect. There's no such thing as magnetic attraction. They're not accelerating towards one another. And this thing called magnetic attraction is no different than gravity, except it is point source gravity. And it is no different than when you pull your socks out of a hot dryer and, you know, they're sticking together, and you pull them apart and they start cracking. And you see the little, if you turn the lights off and do it, you can see the static electricity between the two. It's like you can take one sock and sit there and shake it violently, and the other sock is still stuck to it. That field phenomena is no different than gravity, is no different than the nonsense that people call magnetic attraction, which is not magnetism at all. I hope you like these videos. By the way, I have the links to the Baofeng and the Universal One below. Any donation on these videos, I hope you find them educational, is very greatly appreciated. That also, too, is in the description below. If you ever want to contact me, my email is also, too, below. And thank you so much for watching, and Lux e Veritas. Mother Nature is really simple. Just remember the complicated nonsense that these academicians are putting out there is absolute rubbish. It violates Occam's razor and is completely contradictory to the fundamental simplicity of natura naturans, i.e. Mother Nature, i.e. natural order. And that's not my opinion. That is a fact, Jack. Thank you.